In today's video, I'm going to show you how to use your scrap fabrics to embellish a jean jacket. Hi, I'm Kim Jamison Hurst of Chatterbox Quilts, and recently I discovered a tutorial by Sharon of Pringan Art, and if you don't know who she is, check up above or in the description below because I will put a link to her website and where you can find her tutorial. She has tutorials on all different kinds of ways of using up scrap fabric to make art quilts and embellished work and really cool stuff. And of course I have just a little bit of scrap fabric, so I was really interested to see one of her tutorials, which is making what she calls boho carnival fabric. And I thought this would be perfect to use on the back of a jean jacket to embellish it. And of course, also a good way to use up some scrap fabrics. And when I'm talking scrap fabrics, I'm talking about really thin strips of scrap fabric and also little tiny itsy bitsy pieces like crumb fabric. So I'm not going to tell you all the things in her tutorial, of course, because that's hers, but I did want to share a bit of what I did with the embellished fabric that I made from her tutorial. And I also had some other ideas of how I can use some of the embellishments that you can create from her tutorial to decorate a jean jacket or another piece of clothing, really. So what do you need when you're doing this technique? Well, I did mention scrap fabric, right? And actually what I decided to do with the jean jacket is to kind of make a separate panel first and then stitch it onto my jean jacket. But I did want to mention a few things that I discovered when I was working with this technique. So one of the things that she shows you how to make, she shows you how to make these different embellishments, are these kind of scrappy, really scrappy strips of fabric, okay? And what this is, it's a piece of fabric and then you're adding your fabric scraps to it. And what works best with this particular embellishment is to use really small pieces of fabric. So we're talking crumb fabrics here. And so you can see what I did is I actually had to take some of my scrap fabrics and cut them up even smaller. So you could just, put them on your cutting table and cut them with your rotary cutter. I just use scissors and cut them all up. So it's kind of a meditative thing to do. And then you want to put them in some kind of a container. You see I've got them in a bowl here. So you're going to need quite a few of those pieces of fabric cut up, those little crumb fabric pieces, depending on how many of these fabric strips you want to make. But you do use quite a bit of them, making a strip of this kind of, carnival fabric, I guess, if you want to call it that. So what I did once I had those pieces of fabric is, of course, I took a strip of fabric to put them on, and I just sat down at my sewing machine, threw on some of the scraps, and they don't have to all be up to the edge of the fabric. As a matter of fact, it's better if they overlap. And then I just started stitching down with a straight stitch on one side of that basic fabric strip. And I added pieces as I went along. So I didn't put all my scraps down on the strip first and then stitched. I put, a bunch of them on, did some stitching, stopped, put a bunch more, continued stitching. And when I had finished stitching on one side of the strip, then I turned it around and I added more scraps and stitched down the other side. Actually, no, I didn't add more scraps. I just kept the scraps that were there. Well, if there was any gaps where I could see the background strip, I would add a few more pieces. So I just stitched down that. So now I have that strip stitched on both sides, but there might be some fabric scraps that are kind of loose in the center. So I did a zigzag stitch back and forth. And because I was using all these different bright fabrics, I thought it'd be fun to use a variegated thread. And so that's what I did on this particular strip. So what you end up with is something that looks like this. All right. So you can see that my pieces extend past that scrap, that strip, I should say, in the center, and that's what you want. Okay, you want these loose on the edges, and some of them may even be loose a bit in the center. There's one there that's loose a bit, and that's fine because as you wash this, it's going to fray up a bit. What I'm using here is all batiks. They won't fray quite as much, but if you're using your regular quilting cottons, they'll fray a bit, and that just gives more interest to this look. Okay, so that was one of the things I did. There's also these little knotted strips, and these are where these really thin strips of fabric come in, so you can knot them, and Sharon explains how to do that in her tutorial. But something else I did is I've been keeping some really fun embellishments and just waiting for the right opportunity to use them, and this was definitely it. So I have some of these, which are actually, this looks like yarn. It's like twisted leftover pieces of sari, I think is what this is. And as you can see, this is strips, leftover sari pieces as well. So I have different ones of these, as you can see. And I just thought they're really cool. I knew they'd be great to embellish something. I didn't know what. Finally found it. Yay. So what I did was I took a few, I'll just move these out of the way here. I took a couple of the kind of twisted pieces, okay? And then I took one of the, it's like a ribbon, if you will, okay? So I've got two things that are the same, one that's not, okay, but they're different widths, right? And I cut them all about the same length, approximately. And I want to keep them together because what I'm going to do is braid them. So I just tied a knot kind of near one end here. And then when I'm braiding, I need something to hold that, end, because I only have two hands, right? So I actually used one of my hand weights, okay? So I just stuck it down there. If you have a clamp, you can use that too, that works. And then I just started doing some braiding, right? So you know how to braid over, and it's always the outside one going toward the center, and you just alternate back and forth to whatever happens to be the outside one on the right, the outside one on the left, and you just keep going down. And you can pull this as tight as you want, or as loose as you want, whatever you want, right? And do that. So it gives you something a little more interesting than just one of these, twisted strips, or just one of the one that looks like a ribbon, right? And actually making these and putting them on, I really liked the result of these actually. And they were really easy to stitch down too, because that's something else I'm going to talk to you about in a minute when we want to put these onto the jacket. Well, not the jacket, onto the piece of panel. I'm going to call it a panel, I guess. Onto the panel that I'm eventually going to stitch on the jacket. Okay, so you get the idea. So when I was done with the braid, I would just put another knot at the end, and then I've got this embellishment to use on the panel. All right, so that's some of the things that I had ready. Now, if you want to take a look just at the back here, you'll notice that I've got fabrics underneath these embellishments too, and that's part of Sharon's technique. So what I did initially, because I wanted to put this on a jacket, is I wanted to make that panel, and you need a background piece of fabric first, okay? So I want a background piece of fabric, then you add additional strips to cover it, and then you're going to add those embellishments on it, and I'm going to explain how to get that panel onto your jacket, of course. But what I did is I took my background fabric and I placed it over my jacket where I wanted it to go, which was in this area here, all right? And I made sure that my background piece was bigger than that. But what I did is I placed it over and I used a friction pen. I actually used these friction colors, and I just traced that area on the right side. I put the background fabric right side up. And because there are seams here, I could feel them through the background fabric. So I just traced all along there to give me an area that I knew was going to be in the jacket. Now, once I had that done, and I made sure the piece, that background piece was bigger, as I mentioned, than the area I was going to cover on the jacket, I could then take the fabric strips and apply them, making sure I covered that area and extended a little bit above and to either side of that traced line. So that's how I filled in the background with strips. Again, Sharon explains this in her tutorial. And then, of course, I could, work on my embellishments and make those all. And then I needed to stitch them down as well. So I'm doing all this first on this background fabric to create the panel. But then we have to take the panel and get it onto the jacket, right? But I want to talk a little bit about putting those embellishments on. I used 100 weight polyester thread to do that because I didn't really want the stitching to show very much. I want the embellishments to show. And as I mentioned before, that braided embellishment that I made went down very easily. So I just laid it down. As a matter of fact, what I did first was I laid down all my embellishments, all the ones I wanted to use. I arranged them on my background fabric, and I actually glued them down. Just used water-soluble glue and glued them down to keep them in place. Because I knew that when it came time to stitch them down, I would probably forget where they were, and it would just be a bit of a mess. So I wanted to arrange them first, glue them down. And you can either put some of those embellishments in the center, those little fabric strips you've stitched down, or maybe you want to cover the seams. Again, whatever you want to do, it's up to you. Once I had everything glued down though, it was time to do some stitching. As I mentioned, the braided ones were really easy to stitch down using that 100 weight thread. So I just slowed my machine down, used an applique foot, and just stitched along. And I locked my stitches at the beginning and at the end of each of those stitches, those embellishments I should say. Then when it came to the knotted ones, that was a little bit different, because I didn't have a beading foot or anything similar to that to use to do this. Those type of feet, kind of have a little gap underneath, which allows them to move along over something that's three-dimensional, like those knotted strips are. Think of pearls or something, right? And so I found it was not easy to get over those knots. So what I did instead is I locked my stitches, stitched along just the fabric part, and when I came to a knot, I stopped, locked my stitches, cut my thread, moved to the other side of the knot, locked my stitches, continued stitching along, and I left the knots not stitched, okay? And that worked out fine because the knots are very small. Everything was kept down very well, and I didn't have to worry about that. So, got everything stitched down onto my piece, which is all the embellishments I have on there and everything are a little bit bigger than what I really need for the space. That panel is right now a little bit bigger than what I need on the back of the jacket. And because I've gone past the lines I'd drawn on my background fabric with everything, I no longer have those lines to guide me. So what did I do? Well, I took some water-soluble stabilizer, and this is how you're going to attach this to your jacket, how you're going to attach that panel to your jacket and have nice finished edges. So I took some water-soluble stabilizer, laid it over the jacket. Sounds repetitious. Have we done this before? Sort of, yes. And then, because again, I can feel those seams, so I just used my friction colors and I just drew along the inside of those seams. Okay, so now I actually have the actual size of the panel that's going to be attached to my jacket. Then I took that piece of water-soluble stabilizer and I laid it over top of the embellished panel. And when I did this, I was careful to make sure that the panel underneath, that all the lines were, horizontal, they were parallel, that they weren't askew or anything like that. So once I made sure everything was okay, I then pinned the water-soluble stabilizer outside the drawn lines to that fabric panel. So everything was staying in place. And then it was time to do some stitching, right? So again, I used the 100 weight polyester thread. I stitched all around just a bit outside the drawn line. And I went all the way around, not leaving any gaps or anything, just stitched all the way around. And then I have this piece that is still bigger than what I want it to be, right? So it was time to do some trimming. So I trimmed about a ½ inch away from the stitched line on all sides to cut off the excess background fabric and embellishments and water-soluble stabilizer as well. So then it was getting much closer to the appropriate size. So then to turn it, because I need to turn it right side out, oh, by the way, I clipped the corners as well. And one thing to note is that when I was doing this stitching, because I had that kind of carnival fabrics, those strips, where I've got those loose pieces, I made sure that those didn't get caught in the stitching. I want them to stay loose and three-dimensional, so I actually pinned some of them back so they wouldn't get caught in the stitching as I stitched the water-soluble stabilizer to the panel. Okay, then I clipped the corners. I cut a slit in the back of the water-soluble stabilizer, and then I turned everything right side out very carefully, because the water-soluble stabilizer, it's really easy to tear in that, and I don't want it to tear it all off, of course. So I turned it right side out, poked out the corners with that purple thing, and then I have my panel that is the exact size I want to put on the back of my jean jacket. So how do I do that? Well, that was probably, for me, one of the trickiest parts. I don't know why, but I struggled with it. I'm sure you will not. I'm sure you will not. But I had some issues. But anyway, you take your panel, you're going to put it right down on the back of your jean jacket, and you're going to pin it in place, right? So you keep it all there. And then you can just top stitch around. Again, make sure that those loose fabric strips, you know, the little bits off that carnival fabric, don't get caught in the stitching. And I just stitched around a little bit less than 1/4 inch all the way around the panel. And then you have something, hopefully, that looks like this. And by the way, when you're doing this, make sure that your jacket sleeves and the front part of your jacket are not underneath like those just were. And that you don't stitch parts of your jacket to the backing, you know, to that when you're putting the panel on, because I did that twice. Can you believe it? Twice. So anyway, just a bit of a warning. You heard it from me first. And you can see here again that these, you know, I made sure these were pulled back as I did the stitching so that they didn't get caught in anything. And then I just did the stitching all the way around here, and it was good to go. So it turned out really well. I was really pleased with how it turned out. All the embellishments are on there really well. And as I said, I didn't stitch through the knots. You can see that, but I mean, you know, that's not gonna come off, obviously, or hang down or anything. So I've got the kind of carnival, what I call carnival strips here, knotted strips, braided, and then of course the background has all pieced as well. And there was one more thing I did, because when you put this on, you've only got, you know, the stitching is here. There's no stitching attaching the panel to the jacket at this point in time. So I did go in and I did stitch in the ditch in all these areas here, all the seam lines, as much as I could get into, just to make sure it's really attached well to the back of the jacket. And of course, when I go to wash this, because I haven't washed it yet, keeping my fingers crossed, when I wash it, the water soluble stabilizer will disappear. So you can't see it anyway, but it should disappear from the piece. So I've got some other ideas for you of what you can do with some of these embellishments. If you don't want to make a whole panel, you can make some embellishments and do some things with those on your jacket too. But before I talk to you about that, I want to say a really big thank you to my Patchwork Pals. Those are quilters who are members of my Patchwork Pals YouTube membership, and their monthly subscription helps to support my Chatterbox Quilts YouTube channel. So thanks so much, and if you're interested in joining us in that membership, just click on the join button below any of my videos. You'll get all the details. You could even become a Patchwork Pal today. Now let's talk about what else you could do with some of those embellishments. Okay, first off, make sure that the front part of the jacket isn't caught in the back, right? Okay, because you really don't have to cover this all if you don't want to. You could just add those embellishments right to it. So if you've got some of this boho carnival fabric, for example, you could put it, you could put a crisscross in. You could just use several strips of those and leave the jean material showing through the back if you wanted, like this, for example. Something like that. Maybe you have 3 of them in there. Maybe you just have them at the top and the bottom, like I did on my panel. And you might want to put something else in the center. Well, what if you had one of these knotted pieces left still? Okay, you could put it down and you could actually couch it down. That's a good way to attach it, actually. And you could actually create a little design. Maybe a circle, a kind of a swirl. Maybe you want to just put them across like I had before. Maybe you want to do something like this with them. Okay, something like that. Maybe you could put your initial on the back, right? Wouldn't that be kind of cool? Okay, something like that. I've got, where's my little guy here? Gotta find my little braided guy if he's still braided as well. That's another one you could actually couch down if you wanted to as well. And make, I keep going to swirls because I think they look really cool with this type of embellishment, that you could put it down here, like this sort of, okay? And of course you have to make it long enough to, be long enough for what you're going to do, right? But, you can do lots of things with these, just putting them right on your jacket. These actually too would be very fun on the front of the jacket. making sure the back is not caught in there when you go to stitch. You could even put them down. There's this little strip here, and you could even put something like that down in the center there, make it a little bit narrower maybe if you wanted to, and that would be really cute as well. So there's lots and lots of options for how you can use those embellishments, and you may have extra left over like I did because I wasn't sure how many I really needed. So don't have them go to waste. Use them for embellishing another jacket, or on the front of your jacket, or the sleeves of your jacket, or the cuffs. Possibilities are endless. So thank you so much for watching today. And if you're wondering, I've mentioned couching. If you don't know what couching is and you're wondering how to do that, don't worry, I've got you covered. Check out this video that has all the information that you need. And for more helpful information, be sure to go to my website at www.chatterboxquilts.com.